Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1322B, and today's date is July 3rd, 2017, and the title of the episode is The Fate of the World Does Not Lie in the Hands of the Elite. Let's get into the economic collapse, political, and geopolitical news. Now, we know that Trump, he is going after voter fraud, and we know that 29 states, well, they're not cooperating whatsoever. And he came out and he said, well, what are they trying to hide? Well, out in Rhode Island, there were 150,000 people incorrectly placed on their voter rolls, and nobody really noticed. Now, during the November election, the state had a total of about 781,770 registered voters. That's even after Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea purged the rolls of almost around 65,000 names. Then she declared another 30,000 voters as inactive. Still, there were 150,000 more names on the roll here, which makes no sense. Now, is this fraud? Is it fake voters? Well, we see that the Secretary of State said, no, it's just inaccuracies. It's just one big mistake, and it's not fake voters. But Hillary Clinton won the state by just 70,000 votes, or less than half of the fake voters. Now, I understand that there's inaccuracies. You know, maybe 1,000, 1,200, 800, 700, but 150,000? Something is terribly wrong. And this is why this needs to be looked into, because something just doesn't sound right. Now, it looks like Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel has been talking very tough on climate change. And we can see that many of the nations are out there saying that, yes, we need to join up to climate change, we need to stop this, and we need to put our currency into this and help the situation. Well, they really wanted the currency from the United States. And we know what this was all about. This was about bringing the United States down to the level of the rest of the world, so this way they can have their one world government. This was their plan from the beginning, and also to charge everyone a carbon tax. Now, we know that she's been talking tough on climate change, promising to put it at the forefront of the G20 summit, and doing everything she possibly can to help the world. Now, behind the scenes, however, it appears that Merkel's negotiating teams have been bending over backwards to tone down the climate action plan. Germany has massively weakened its climate action plan for the G20 summit. Very interesting. Is that because Trump backed out of it and they don't have the funds they need? Well, why can't these countries, if they're so concerned, why don't they kick in more funds? Because it doesn't fit into their overall plan. Their overall plan was not to help the earth. Their overall plan was to make all countries equally the same. This way they can pass workers from one country to another, where they can have full control over the system. And we can see that this is not happening right now. Now, out in the Czech Republic, we can see they are basically doing what the United States did, and they are creating the right to bear arms into their constitution. Now, there are many countries throughout the world that are not far behind us, such as Serbia, Yemen, Cyprus, and many Western nations like Finland, Switzerland, and they all allow their citizens to carry weapons, but the United States is one of the only countries that has it in their constitution. And we see, well, Honduras and Mexico have the same right in their constitution, but they have a lot of restrictions. Yes, we have restrictions here in the United States, which most of them violate the Second Amendment completely. But we see that the Czech Republic, they're going to add this right to bear arms to its constitution. And it's very similar to the U.S. Second Amendment to the Constitution, which gives Americans the right to keep bear arms. The Czech legislation reads, citizens of the Czech Republic have the right to acquire, retain, and bear arms and ammunition. And we see that the reason the Founding Fathers decided to do this was not for hunting, not for sport. It was to protect the people against a tyrannical government, a government that wanted to control the people. Because the Founding Fathers, this is what they fought for. They understood this. This is why they included it right below freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Because what gives you that freedom? The right to bear arms and to say no to the government. Because when there's a population that does not have the right to bear arms and they do not have weapons, and the government grows too big, becomes tyrannical, and decides to do whatever they want, the people have no way of fighting back. Now we see that Duerte, his decision to approach China as a partner rather than an adversary, well, it's really paying off. Now, people called him crazy for doing this because you need to go back in time, because the United States was in the South China Sea saying that China, they're building these islands, they won't let anyone sail there, we have the right to navigation, even though the United States never signed or ratified the right to navigation. They were using that to convince the world, and Duerte was out there saying, no, we're not going to go along with this. We're going to deal with China. And he dealt with China, and China says, sure, you can sail your ships anywhere you want inside the South China Sea. You can fish, no problem. Now, Duterte's policy of reaching a cooperative deal in the South China Sea dispute has now opened China's One Belt, One Road trade project to the Philippines. So China has also pledged to assist Philippines in its war against terrorism when and if it is needed. So right now, Duterte, he has secured his country's future among the successful powers of the region and basically the world. And we see at this point that he's teaming up with China because he realizes that this is the system, this is the new economic system that he needs to be on. And if he would have gone along with the United States, with Obama at that time, well, his country would have been turned into a drug smuggling, human trafficking country, and it would have been a complete mess. And most likely his country would be on the front lines of World War III. Now, Trump has called China, Japan, he's called the leaders to discuss North Korea. And basically, they are looking at the North Korean situation. They're talking about trade issues. They want to talk about denuclearization of North Korea. And he wants Japan, he wants China, he wants the Philippines, basically all to work together and basically calm the situation down in North Korea. Now, what's very interesting is that the USS Stetham, a guided missile destroyer, sailed within 12 nautical miles of the Triton Islands, part of the Paracel Islands in the South China Sea. And it really looks like the deep state, they are pushing their agenda, sailing the ships very close to these islands, trying to provoke China still. Now, we need to remember something very important. Trump does not have full control of every aspect of the government. There are rogue elements still inside the government that are controlling certain areas. And we can see this out in the Middle East. We can see it out in the South China Sea. And we can see that the deep state, they're still pushing buttons. Now, what's very interesting is that Trump and Putin, they're going to be meeting at the G20 summit later this week. And they're not going to be talking about Russian meddling. They're not going to be talking about Russian hacking. They're going to be talking about anything they want. There is no specific agenda. Now, what I think is happening right now is they don't want to tell the corporate media what the agenda is, because then they're going to go crazy over it. I think it's going to be quiet. I think they already have an agenda set, and I think they're going to be talking about things that are happening in Syria, things that are happening out around the world, and they're going to be coordinating to basically end all of this. Now, this seems ridiculous on the surface, but what you see happening now out in the Middle East, especially with Qatar, and we'll get into that in a moment, especially what's happening out in Syria, we'll get to that in a moment, and we can see what's happening in the rest of the world, we can see that things are absolutely changing right now. Now, Germany is warning that this G20 meeting, they're very worried about cyber attacks, and they have their cyber experts standing by to respond to any attack that occurs. They also have 20,000 police with dogs, horses, helicopters. They're going to be deployed outside of the G20 meeting in Hamburg to protect the area. Now, We know that they want to interrupt this G20 meeting. They really don't want Putin and Trump to get together in person, and they'll probably do whatever they possibly can to interrupt this. Now, we'll have to watch and see and how this turns out, but we can see right now that Trump and Putin, they have been talking with each other. And I think they're working together in Syria right now. I think they're working together in other areas to calm the situation down everywhere. Now, with Qatar, well, the deadline came up Sunday at midnight. Now, that time has passed. Now, Saudi Arabia said, listen, we'll give you an extra 48 hours to come up with your answers. Now, Trump was out there, and he is saying that the situation needs to be calmed down, but he also reiterated the importance of stopping terrorist financing and discrediting extremist ideology. The president also underscored that unity in the region is critical to accomplishing the summit's goal, the Saudi Arabia summit's goal of defeating terrorism and promoting regional stability. And I think what's happening here is the big picture is they're calling out where the terrorism is coming from, this Middle Eastern, the Gulf nations. Now, of course, they pointed the fingers to Qatar, and I believe within Qatar, this is where the deep state camps are. This is where a lot of the training was held. Yes, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, they all contributed to this. They gave a lot of money. They supplied a lot of the equipment. But the actual deep state camps, I think, lie within Qatar, and I don't think this is against the government itself. I think this is, listen, get out of this country or else. That is the warning there. Now, the Qatari foreign minister, he's arrived in Kuwait to respond to the demands of Saudi Arabia, and Qatar has called the conditions impossible and urged for their revision. And we'll have to see what they come up with. And we need to remember something very important here. What is happening in Iraq? Well, according to the Iraqi generals, the Islamic State is pretty much obliterated in Iraq. In Syria, we have the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Al-Sham, and the rest of the terrorist organizations. They are losing ground like crazy. So the support of terrorism right now really makes no sense for these Gulf nations. And as everything completely falls apart, they don't want to be left standing there going, okay, we were the ones who created all of this. So what they're trying to do is basically mop up the situation. And we can see this mop-up operation going on right now. Right now, a Syrian legislator came out and said, listen, the United States is helping the Islamic State to escape Raqqa. We've seen U.S. planes coming in. They're transferring the Islamic State terrorists from the Raqqa province to someplace else. And we can see just with this, they've done this before, where they've moved the Islamic State around. It looks like they're removing the Islamic State because they realize at this point they're beaten and they can't let them get captured. They can't allow the records to be out there. So what they do is they have this gigantic mop-up operation. The walls are closing in on the deep state. And listen, time is ticking down here. I mean, look at this out in Syria. For the first time ever, Syria has introduced a banknote with Assad's picture on it. The 2000 Syrian lira, well, this went into circulation on Sunday. This is the first time Assad's face has been featured on the country's currency since he came into power 17 years ago. Who was on there before? Well, it was his father. But this tells you that things are rapidly changing. Now, the U.S. is setting up a new military base for the Free Syrian Army in the northeastern part of Syria, saying this is where they'll equip these fighters. This is where they'll house these fighters. And I don't think it's going to last too long because we can see that Russia, Syria, they are sweeping through Syria. They're heading into the east, the northeastern part of Syria. And it doesn't matter how many bases the deep state sets up. I don't think this is going to last much longer because what we're seeing right now is Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. Well, he's told the UN Secretary General that the fate of the Syrian leader, Bashar al-Assad, now lies in the hands of Russia. And he said the Trump administration, their number one priority is getting rid of the Islamic State. Now, think about what he's saying here. The fate of Assad is left with the Russians. Now, Assad invited Russia in. What do you think the fate's going to be? He's going to be president still. Now, Trump's number one mission, the administration's number one mission, is removing the paid mercenary army. And we can see that what they're saying is Assad is going to have a government in Syria. And we're getting rid of the terrorist groups at the same time. We're making things right. And this is the mission. It looks like Trump knows who's controlling the terrorist groups at this point. It looks like Putin and Trump, they've already had the discussion. And we can see that out in Iraq, out in Syria, eventually out in Afghanistan, the deep state's paid mercenary armies, they're just going to disappear. They're going to be transported someplace else or destroyed. But we can see they're not giving up just yet. The Syrian rebels, they've come out and they have accused the Syrian army of using, yes, chemical weapons, chlorine gas. Why in the world would Assad do this right now? Why would he even use chlorine gas? He has the rebels, he has the Islamic State, he has Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra, they're on the run. There is no reason to use chlorine gas and make people cough. It makes no sense. And we could see at this point, they're just using whatever they possibly can to convince everyone that he's using chemical weapons. And we could see right now that the Iran's defense minister is saying, yeah, this is all propaganda. Assad is not using chemical weapons. Russia's not using chemical weapons. This is completely fake, phony, and false. Seymour Hersh came out with his article. There was an MIT professor that looked at the entire situation. It is completely fake. And this announcement that Trump made that the Syrian government was going to be using chemical weapons, that was a message to Putin to let him know that the deep state was planning something else. Now, a lot of people think that, well, this was another false flag that was being set up. Well, you don't announce false flags. That's not how they work. Secondly, a lot of people think that, well, Seymour Hersh came out with his article and this was a distraction. The corporate media was never going to publish this article. Yes, it might have been on the alternative media, and it was on the alternative media. It was all over the place, and everyone mentioned it. But the corporate media, they would have never admitted to the article that Seymour Hersh wrote. They would have never said, yes, the chemical attacks didn't happen. Think about how they've lied over time. When you have a lie, you need a lie to sit on top of that lie. You can't turn around and tell the truth. If they ran this article, and let's say Trump didn't say a word, and they said, okay, you know what? Let's put Seymour Hersh's article out there and let the world know that the chemical attack never happened. Well, Trump, all he has to do is say, well, I received that information from the intelligence agency. You mean they lied to me? He had an out. 2, then every single chemical weapon attack would be questioned. Wait a minute. You're telling us this was fake. In the corporate media, they told you it was true. They even cited past stories of how Assad used chemical weapons. They then would have to say, well, yeah, this is false. And then people would say, well, what about the rest? If this is false, and this never happened, and they never used chemical weapons, what about going all the way to the beginning? They would have never done this. It would have completely destroyed the deep state. This is not a move they would have made. Actually, they would have lied on top of a lie. They would say, yes, he used double chemical weapons or something like that. This would not have helped them whatsoever. And Trump actually had it out. All he had to do is blame it on the intelligence services. Well, they told me this. You mean they're lying all this time? So when people say this was a distraction, this is a false flag, it really doesn't fit together at all. And with Tillerson's announcement today, we can see their plan all along, the same with North Korea, and it's going to be the same with Afghanistan. They're going after the deep state. The deep state no longer controls our fate. I mean, they're still going to try. They've been working at this for a very long time. But we are starting to get the upper hand. Trump is out there continually every day telling everyone about fake news. He's not just doing it just to do it. Remember, the corporate media has been spewing this garbage for a very long time. They've been taking stories from the deep state and just telling people this is the way it is. Somebody needs to wake up the American public. We've been propagandized for so long, people don't know what's up or down. They need to be shown. They need to be shown the truth. Just like when you were woken up, you needed to be shown the truth. At first, you didn't believe. You were angry. I didn't want to hear it. Don't tell me this. And then you moved into the next phase where you were angry, saying, can this be true? Have I been lied to all this time? And then acceptance. You started looking into this, researching, and you started telling other people. And other people thought you were crazy. Actually, they probably still think you're crazy. But people need to be woken up right now. And the reason they need to be woken up, not just because of the collapse that's coming, because the truth is the most powerful weapon. If he can get the majority of the country to see the truth, the deep state is completely finished. They are done. This is why he is doing this right now. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.